Hello, my friends. Welcome to your seat at the table. I'm Rick, and we are looking at Dungeons and Dragons Manual of the Planes for edition 3.5, I believe. Uh, I can't be for sure because I couldn't find the exact date, year that it was published in here, no matter where I looked in it. So I'm going to say the early 2000, 2001, 2003, something like that. I mean, can't exactly Google it while I'm doing videos now. So here's what it is. Manual of the Planes by Jeff Grubb, Bruce Cordell, and David Newman. Most powerful adventurers know the greatest rewards and greatest perils await them beyond the world they call home. All right. So, from the earliest days of Dungeons and Dragons, the idea of planar travel existed, dimensional travel. And over the decades, this become more expanded and wider ranged. And so we have everything from literally the various planes of the deities themselves to the potentials of the multiverse. Literally, the concepts of the multiverse was envisioned by these people that were creating these games in the 70s and 80s. So it's interesting how they progressed. Planular anything comes in a couple of forms. One is where the planar stuff crosses over into the real prime material plane where your player characters have to interact with it and deal with it. Then there are the magical means and or gates and other things that can allow the characters to travel to other places and other universes without a thought or with very little effort. And then there are the actual campaigns where you are purposely gone beyond the normal world and into the various whatevers to pursue higher agendas and higher goals. This all has varying levels of complexity and simplicity, or their lack thereof, involved in it. So, at your lower levels, the less planar travel they do, the better off they are. The truth is, they should rarely, if ever, encounter any of the upper level player things and encounters and creatures and NPCs and deities and so on and so forth, because they're just not capable of dealing with them. They're just not prepared for that. The opportunities at mid-level, when they start getting to where the wizards can create devices that allow for planar travel, then the complexity should increase, but still not be totally dominated on. Generally speaking, I've always tried to discourage players from trying to go beyond the prime material plane, i.e. to go into planar travel adventures until their characters have reached the higher levels, if 10th level, 8th level, something in there, where they at least have a moderate chance of surviving and not end up losing their character in the process. Then there's the entire campaigns that are revolving around it. This stuff literally becomes epic level play at that level, as far as I'm concerned. And I've always had mixed opinions on the play in the planes in the first place. While I like the idea of having all the options available that provides us, I have been a big fan of just the normal world, whatever the sandbox setting is of operating, because the parameters there are more pure to the system in my mind. Then we talk about the various chapters, nature of the planes, connecting the planes, characters of magic, material planes. Look, there are plenty of people out there, plenty of YouTube sites that can go through the depths of why and the hows, the mechanics. I don't want to go into that at this point. That's not what we're here for. The material plane, Chapter 5, the transition planes, Chapter 6, the inner planes, Chapter 7, the outer planes, Chapter 8, the demi-planes, Chapter 9, monsters, appendix, variant planes and cosmologies, the list of maps and diagrams, list of sidebars. Lots of sidebars. So, introduction, the manual of the planes. Planes are new worlds, alternate realities, and other dimensions that may exist just next door to the places that characters have already been comfortable with. But these are places where the basic rules that every adventurer takes for granted no longer apply, and the safety of the characters' hearth and home is far away indeed. Other planes may exist on just behind that magical mirror, or on the other side of a fearsome portal, or beyond the rainbow-lighted waterfall. These gateways let the dungeon masters take their campaigns into literally new dimensions, creating new lands for new players. All right, let me touch on a couple things are off the top of my head when it comes to this sort of stuff. First off, one of the earliest planular hops or dimension travel hops or memes that became popular when I was in the late 70s, early 80s, was when we crossed genres. So you would take, if you Plume Mountain or whichever one of the earliest the S series. One of them had Beyond Blue Mountain. One of them that has a crashed UFO in it. Is the implication that you can jump to other planes. It was later we started things like Spelljammer that literally allowed you to sail to different worlds in the same existing plane that you existed in. If you want your own existing dimension, you existed in. But you had this opportunity to expand beyond that, which that was where we could go into the modern day. If I wanted to take my dungeon, my crew, have them step through a wizard portal and be Central Park, New York City, 2021, it works. Then it's just a matter of how do they comport themselves in an environment they're completely unused to dealing with, and all the implications thereof. And it just goes down the list the same way. The other thing was that with planar travel is that we had to look at the idea that we may not come back. So you often transition. That was one way of looking at it, because there are some rules of thought when it comes to the clerical stuff that a lot of the planes are their literal afterlife. So when you look at the nine hells, for example, that's the literal afterlife for a lot of souls, but it's also a literal living environment for the demons and devils and stuff that occupy them and rule them. So you kind of run into this conundrum of different vibes that was hard it was hard to explain well, and you either got into it or you didn't. The other interesting problem we had with the planar travel was the sheer amount of possibilities and opportunities were so vast, so deep. It was almost daunting, and we tended to underutilize them at best. We poorly utilized them at worst, which, you know, kind of came with experience. I think as we got older, we had to learn to be more nuanced about exactly what it is with the planes we were trying to achieve or what our goal was. If we were just going through a random jaunt, all of the time bandits or something like that, then it didn't matter because you could just keep out. The whole point was survival and then keep moving. So, it's a matter of what you're trying to get out of it. Connecting the planes, planar interaction, building your own cosmology, the D&D cosmology. Well, I don't know how many dungeon masters over the years I've run into that created their own sandboxes, their own worlds, including their own pantheons and deities and their own cosmos and all this other. And I applauded them. And I like, Jesus, dude, that is far more work than I want to do. But if that is your gig and that's how you want to, and that's your thing, hey, knock yourself out. Because there's plenty of us can take advantage of stuff you created if you share that kind of stuff. I mean, I never cared to. I just used the existing the cosmology and pantheons and things because it was just simpler. I didn't really want to go that far out into creating my own world for these people to operate out. Sample cosmology, the omniverse. This was the other thing that had issues, especially when I was younger. My friends and I would struggle somewhat on the concept of the planes because there was such a wide range and variety of the different cosmologies or whatever. It was just too many possibilities, too many options. It just made things more complicated than it need to be, and that really just didn't have to be, right? So again, some prestige classes and things. The Gate Crasher, the Planular Champion, the Plane Shifter, Magic on the Planes, new spells. All right. So we got the transitional planes. That was another thing we had to figure out because some planes lead to other planes, and then those from those planes, you had to travel to these planes to get to those planes, and you had to deal with whatever the challenges were in the first place before getting to the second place. And then you had to remember that you had to repeat the process, or perhaps the process went a different way. So once you get to the other place, from there you had to travel to the third place by, I don't know, threading the needle of somebody's anus or something. I've seen some pretty weird stuff depending on who's running what. Yeah, there was some running joke on the Temple of Ultimate Evil that it cumulated it, the only way you could escape was to get swallowed by a demon and come out his backside, so or something like that. Now, I never found that to be true, and always found that to be what whenever it came up. You know, they don't come up these days anymore. So obviously, we've long moved past that. You know, various types of planes, the planes of shadow, inner planes, connecting planes, interplane habits. So this goes on and on. Elemental planes, the various elementals. You got water, air, earth, each one with its own challenges. Then you go into certain things like every plane potentially has a different type of gravity, different kind of property, magic properties. This can become a pain in the ass too, excuse my French, over time, especially if you're jumping from planar dimension, and you have to take into account you have a new set of parameters every time you transition to a new place. This might mean needing to keep track of caveats and special adapter rules, and well, can I, what spells can I utilize here, and what can't I, and what are the effects, and are they worth using, and did I know that before I came here, and can I get around it, and so that they try to address some of that in here, but it doesn't. It's a matter of how you apply it, I think. So outer plane traits, outer plane links, traveling to the outer planes, outer plane inhabitants, the nature of the dead, categories of godhood, heroic domains, Ysgard, ever-changing chaos of Limbo. Yeah, it just goes on and on. All right. Harder in depths of cursory. There was a character, we talk about backstories. There was this character, this player, and I don't remember what campaign it was, but he was running a Tanari or something. He was half he had half demon blood or devil blood or something. I don't remember what. And but I do know that his backstory stipulated that he'd actually grew up in his father or his mother's wizard's tower, and it was located in a position where it overlooked the plains of of something. One of the many hells that hellscapes, and for whatever reason, it was because it was closely tied to the wizard's preferred whatever, was it elemental magic or fire magic or what? Excuse me, I don't remember what it was, but his backstory had him where he was growing up looking out windows of this at this from this magically hidden tower overlooking this horrific plane, and how it screwed with his brain. And I tapped into that on a couple occasions because in one occasion we had it where they actually dimension traveled to his mother's tower, his father's tower, anyway, to the tower to get some advice and to retrieve something he felt was necessary. So, Great Waste of Hades, very Bleak Eternity of Vienna, Nine Hells of Batar, right? Something else. Uh, the challenges operating. Okay, of all the planes, Clockwork of Mechanicus. Mechanicus is one of my favorites. This one I tapped a couple times. I had one campaign that had something to do. We were pretty deep into Clockwork. We was doing a lot of mechanical stuff in that particular campaign, and so it was a natural deal that toward the end of the campaign itself, it accumulated in trying to fix something, was a gear or something on Mechanicus that was corrupted or had been altered by the bad guy, and the good guy's final goal was to rectify it, was to return this thing to itself because it was going to affect something else, and I forget what the exact detail was now, but I just found that it was an interesting terrain. Like Union, it's probably my second most utilized sites is the Mechanus, for a number of reasons. The other thing was Mechanus is thick with additional portals, so it was a natural travel crossroads in some way if you want to look at it. Time man, yeah, I can remember using Tiamat once or twice in my very young days, and it was so overkill, because I wanted to use her. It's like you have all these interesting foes, and if you want to tap them at some point or another, but it was terribly misappropriate for what the scenario was. Uh, it didn't end well for anybody, including the players were unhappy with my choice, and I was, well, just want to use it, I'm like, you had to, but it's a learning curve. So I try to tell people, when you want to be a game master, fine, great, but don't kid yourself. You're not going to master anything in a short time, and it can take you years to become mastering of what you think you master. But are you really truly the master of it, or any of us? I'm just, like I said, there are some people out there, and you can see on YouTube, they retain a lot of what they read. I have read more crap than I have forgotten more crap that I've read than they themselves have read in their lifetime. And that's the truth. That's a fact. Doesn't change the fact that I didn't read all of it. It just means that I didn't absorb it like I was going to be an instructor on it. So some of them have, and that's great, and they're able to share that in much greater detail than I can do, or and put in effort that I'm not really overly willing to try to do, because I know that I don't want to do all the pen and paperwork it would take to be verifying a lot of stuff that I would say, but I want to be able to say it with confidence and not with, well, I remember, because I'm old. All right. Blessed fields of Elysium, wilderness of the beast. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just my experiences. But I've noticed that when planar travel is engaged, when campaigns do take the characters beyond the prime material plane into the vastness of the multiverse and various whatevers, uh, it tends to go to the bad places. They tend to end up in bad places. The levels of hell will keep cropping up quite frequently, as opposed to the goodly places. You don't go to Elysium very often. You don't go to, you don't go to the green fields. I mean, when you ought to, because there's opportunities for there too. I think the one exception I had was, and the Greenfields comes to mind, because I had a player that was a big fan of playing halflings and hobbits, and the party got into some dire straits, and he was his halfling rogue was a dabbling cleric too. So he was a strong believer in this particular halfling deity that was over home and hearth and protection or whatever, and they were in an utterly dire strait. They were going to fail, and I used my GM prerogative to invoke an active deity. So this halflings, they all woke, well, they're all one moment from the end of everything, and then next thing they're woke up in this perfect place that the halfling just about, he couldn't come to grips with where he thought he was, and then he got confirmation at the very last end that they had traveled to the green fields, and they had rested and recuperated and regained everything they needed to regain, and were in much better position to return to face the final foes of the battles of the campaign, etc., etc. Was that a cheat? Did I manipulate the outcome to preserve the campaign, to allow the players a chance to recuperate? Because there are some people today that would make the argument, well, you shouldn't have done that. The characters didn't decide that. They didn't want to do that. They didn't bring it up. And my argument would be, how do you figure? The player decided that they were on a bad spot, and he mutters a prayer at the table to his deity, thinking he's about to die anyway. And the next moment, the deity had answered in a way that was not flashy, was not, spectacular, was not awe-inspiring or earth-shattering. And the party was never confident they were actually in a heaven state that they had traveled to one of these planar existence of the halflings, idea of heaven, but everything had been too perfect. Everything was too ethereal. Everything was too happy. Everything was too. Matter of fact, the players began to become extremely annoyed by the fact that it was such a positive and happy place, and the local inhabitants, well, they didn't even see. They just seemed unreal and how generous and how positive they were, and it was difficult to play them because I'm not generally that kind of a positive person. But it is what it is. They still served its role. Wilderness of the Beastlands. All right. Olympian glades of Arborea. See, there's another thing about various planes, especially planes that are connected to alignments. I played the one epic level campaign I played in that involved planar travel. In part had to do with because it was kind of our take on the time of troubles. So there was all kinds of problems going on with the Panathlon and stuff in Forgotten Realms at the time, and we've seen this bunch of anti-magic areas show up, and wild magic ramps up, and a whole bunch of other stuff goes south. So the players are planar traveling, and they get into this, and the longer they go, the more depth they get, the more involved they are, the more bewildered they became by it. But I think at the long run, they bite into it. As the player, I kept seeing this as this potential for growth because we were tapped to go outside of our existential existence. In my character's view, the gods picked us to go on this to save the universe kind of adventure, and I don't know. It turned out okay, but in the long run, I think not everybody was on board 100% with exactly what they thought an epic level campaign was supposed to be, and setting it in the planes just made it more overly complicated. So once again, you have that complication can be a problem, especially if your players aren't suited for dealing with it. When you go to a plane where the laws of magic are different, infinite size, definitely more morphic, no elemental or energy traits. Well, when it says no elemental energy traits, well, what the hell does that mean? It means you can't bring them with you, or they don't naturally occur there. I mean, you have to mildly neutral, so some things work, some things don't. Some things we also had to be cautious. I had a friend who was a big fan of planular adventures, but I noticed over time that a lot of there was something missing or lacking in the campaign for such a planular advanced settings that we were operating in. It seemed almost like mundane normal world, his normal world building if we was playing in the regular world. And I had to point that out to him a couple times, and I don't think he ever quite got it. That when you play in these outworlds, these other planar dimensions, they're trying to tell you that there's some distinct things. Pick on one or two. So if there's a sulfuric stench, milk it. Be that the dominant thing that they remember. If there's the gravity is wonky, milk it. Make them remember how much problems they had achieving that. Limit how many of these planar jumps you make in a given time, because it takes a minute to become accustomed with the limitations or the factors for the particular setting. And if we jump around too much, it's easy to start intermixing them and becoming complicated or beyond when it's not necessary. And if you don't run into that, then good, knock yourself out. Demiplanes, Chapter 8. One of the things that I liked about demiplanes was I started to connect that some of these demiplanes are actually constructs, magical constructs. So if your wizard gets powerful, sufficiently powerful enough, they can create their own demiplane, their own pocket plane, pocket dimension, things like this. Which then it's just up to them to decide how they're going to trick it out. We get Chapter 9 monsters, various things for the planar travel. I have tapped these fellows a couple of times and then downsized them to utilize them in mundane campaign settings because I thought they were interesting as all get out, and so on and so forth. So, a lot of exotic things. Yeah. The inevitables. When I was doing that Mechanicus campaign where everything ended, it accumulated at Mechanicus and fixing the broken gear. I had a lot of these constructs running around, and I had a lot. There's a whole slew of other ones, constructs that are embedded in or around and Mechanicus as well, and it got to be pretty interesting. It got pretty strange. All right. Oh, the Bersines. This fella here. There are extraplanar merchants selling weapons, magic, and other treasures from plane to plane. I had one campaign was set in the Underdark where it was a quote evil campaign, semi-evil campaign. They set up in this elvish drow city, underworld city, basically. Technically, it was more of a hodgepodge collection. There was no one great faction controlling the entire environment. There were several dominating factions that had understandings amongst themselves to keep the bloodshed down. Anyway, the characters set up there, and they had a Mercine. There was a Mercine merchant they started doing business with, and the Mercine would commission them to acquire certain things, and travel to different places to get it. And they achieved it more often than not. It took me a minute to figure out how to play the character in. Especially since initially I had him disguised. I remember what he was disguised as. I think I had him disguised as a drow. Uh, it took a while for them to figure out he wasn't drow. Generally, it was because the other drow did not trust him at all and felt that he was something was off by him, but they couldn't figure out what it was because it wasn't their job to figure that out. And then you don't stick your nose in it, collective nose into things you don't, if you don't want your nose blasted off by or cut off or worse, right? So, planar travel in and of itself can be fun, can be highly problematic. On a larger campaign perspective, you can make some pretty rich campaigns set across the planes or just picking a specific plane as the sandbox for the time being. That's something that I point out to players too. We can have a series of mini campaigns where we use the same characters. So we run this campaign for 4 months. We have 7 sessions or 10 sessions, and there's a beginning, a middle, and a somewhat satisfying ending or conclusion. We then decide we want to go play Star Wars for a while. So we shelf the campaign, or we just stop. We go out and play a different game. We come back a couple months, a couple weeks, whatever. We sit back down. And we say, okay, let's reopen the previous campaign with everybody, with the characters and everything we had, and we will then follow the logic course where the last campaign finished and move to a different plane where we can do this, and that. And that worked for a while too, but the planes can be tricky. And it's hard to sustain. If you guys have had one of these campaigns where you were able to run a campaign that dealt with epic level play and planar combat or planar play on this as the main genesis of what your campaign settings are, and did so for 6 months, a year, or better, by all means, let us share the comments. Let us know. Anyway, I'm Rick. You're not. Till next time. Hope you guys have yourself a great holiday. If I have not posted this yet, have a great Christmas and great New Year. If it's already passed, well, you already know.